90 hate messages every hour.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
That's what journalist Maria Ressa had to deal with just for doing her job.
Wow.
It's unbelievable. And it's why we're doing this deep dive today into the very real problem of online violence against women journalists.
Right. Yeah.
We've got some heavy research to dig into, excerpts from UNESCO, the International Center for Journalists, and a report from the Best Practice Forum on Gender and Digital Rights.
Okay, so we're talking like global organizations really looking into this.
Absolutely. And we need to unpack this. How bad is this problem? What are the tactics being used? And the big question, what can we actually do about it? Because this isn't just about journalists, is it?
No, it's so much bigger than that.
Exactly. It's about free speech. It's about making the internet safer for everyone. And one of the things that really got me reading through all of this was how often online hate crosses that line into real-world threats.
Oh, absolutely. And, it sends chills down your spine because we actually see cases where this online harassment turns into violence. I mean, even murder.
Exactly.
And the fact that so many crimes against journalists they go unsolved, it just makes it so much worse, so much scarier for these women.
It's terrifying. The UNESCO study, they found that 20%, 1 in 5, think about that, 1 in 5 women journalists have experienced real-life abuse because of online attacks.
That's huge. 1 in 5. That's a shocking statistic.
A huge red flag.
Yeah. And, it makes you think about the bigger picture of how we treat journalists, the lack of protection. If there are no consequences for threatening and harassing, well, it just creates an environment where violence festers. This isn't just a local problem. This is global.
Absolutely. And let's talk about the attacks themselves, because the language in these reports, it's intense. Dogpiling, swarms, weaponized disinformation. It's almost like a playbook of aggression.
It is, and it's deliberate. Take dogpiling, for example. It's like you say one thing online, and suddenly you're drowning in these hateful messages, right?
Yeah.
And it's often coordinated. It's not just random people. It's strategic.
So intimidating. And then you've got weaponized disinformation. The report talks about how this is basically, using fake news to discredit someone's work?
Exactly. It's not just name-calling. It's calculated to make people doubt everything a journalist says, everything they stand for.
Yeah.
And it works, sadly, especially now when it's already so hard to tell what's real and what's not online.
It's insidious. So it's not even about silencing the journalist directly anymore. It's about making everyone else question whether they're telling the truth.
Exactly. Undermining their entire credibility. And you see these common threads in the attacks, trying to discredit their work, silencing opinions, just straight up misogyny.
Right.
And then on top of all that, you have intersectional abuse, where the attacks are rooted in racism, homophobia, all those layers of discrimination.
The reports have these quotes, these firsthand accounts. They're just heartbreaking. I was reading about Black women journalists talking about the kind of racist and sexist abuse they face. It's like this awful combination of discrimination all at once.
It's awful. And it highlights how these attacks often target those who are already vulnerable. It's about maintaining power, silencing anyone who dares to challenge the way things are.
And talking about brave women, the report highlights 2 journalists in particular, Maria Ressa and Carol Cadwalader.
2 women who refuse to back down. Ressa, reporting on disinformation in the Philippines, and Cadwalader exposing the Cambridge Analytica scandal. Both of them became targets for speaking truth to power, and the stakes get incredibly high when you do that.
Absolutely. And the attacks were just vicious. Ressa being mocked for her eczema, Cadwalader labeled a mad cat lady. These personal, below-the-belt attacks, they're meant to do real damage.
They are, and we have to understand there are often political motivations behind these attacks. These women are seen as threats to certain agendas, so the goal is to discredit them, silence them by any means necessary. The report even mentions specific politicians and media figures who amplify these attacks, which makes it even more dangerous.
It makes you wonder, where are the social media companies? Where are the news organizations in all of this? You'd think they'd be doing more to protect these women. It's almost like by not taking a stronger stand, they're part of the problem.
And that's a criticism that comes up a lot in the reports, actually. Social media companies just aren't doing enough. They don't seem to get how serious this is, how much damage it does. And a lot of the time, it feels like they care more about their bottom line than about people's safety.
It's true. I mean, they have all these resources, all this technology at their fingertips. They could be doing so much more to fix this.
Right, and it's not like it's impossible. The reports actually lay out a bunch of potential solutions.
So what needs to happen?
Well, everyone has a role to play. Governments, tech companies, newsrooms, even individuals.
Okay, so let's break that down a little. What does that actually look like, practically speaking?
Well, for governments, it's about creating laws that actually protect journalists,
Ah,
holding people accountable for harassment and threats. Right now, there's just this culture of, well, you can get away with it, so why not?
that lack of accountability is really scary.
Absolutely. Then there's tech companies. I mean, they're the ones who built these platforms, right? So they have a responsibility to make them safer, investing in better ways to moderate content, using technology to flag hate speech and get rid of it.
So being proactive instead of reactive, basically.
Exactly. And they need to be more transparent about how they operate. Let people see what they're doing to tackle this problem
Mhm.
and hold them accountable when they fall short.
And what about the news organizations themselves? I mean, shouldn't they be doing everything they can to protect their own journalists? The reports seem to suggest that they're not always doing enough.
Yeah, it's a real problem. The reports call it this thing called victim blaming, like asking a woman journalist what she did to provoke the attacks.
Oh, come on. That's like blaming someone who got mugged for what they were wearing. It makes no sense.
Exactly. And then there's this other response, speech policing. Instead of going after the harassers, news organizations try to control what journalists say, especially on social media.
So they're basically silencing their own people to try to prevent attacks.
It's a terrible situation because women are caught in this impossible position. If they speak out, they risk being attacked. But if they stay silent, it feels like they're giving in.
I can't imagine how stressful that must be.
Yeah.
The report actually found a really strong link between online harassment and mental health issues in women journalists.
It's incredibly damaging. We're talking anxiety, depression, insomnia. Some women even report PTSD-like symptoms.
That's so awful. So what can we do? How can we be better allies to women journalists who are dealing with this kind of abuse?
Honestly, one of the most powerful things you can do is speak up. When you see harassment happening online, don't just scroll past it. Challenge it. Report it. Show your support for the person being targeted.
It's like they say, silence is complicity.
Right. Our individual actions might seem small, but when we all come together, it can make a real difference.
So it's not just about calling out the bad, but actively trying to make things better, right?
Absolutely. We need to challenge the stereotypes and prejudices that fuel this kind of abuse. We need to help people learn how to spot disinformation, to think critically about what they see online.
So it's about educating ourselves and each other, both online and in the real world.
Exactly. It's about changing the entire culture so that online violence becomes unthinkable.
And the reports talk a lot about intersectional abuse too, right? How these attacks get even worse when they target someone's race, religion, sexual orientation, all of that.
It's a really important point. Those attacks cut deep because they tap into these very ingrained prejudices. It's not just about silencing one journalist, it's about silencing entire communities.
And the report actually offers some concrete solutions for that, which is really helpful.
Mm.
Like, they suggest that news organizations should provide more training and support for journalists, especially those from marginalized groups who are more likely to be targeted.
Absolutely. Give journalists the tools they need to deal with online harassment and make sure they have access to mental health support.
Because you can't just tell someone to shrug it off when they're being bombarded with hate all the time, right?
Sure.
That's going to leave a mark.
Exactly. We need to acknowledge how emotionally and psychologically damaging this abuse can be and be ready to support people who are struggling.
So it sounds like it's not enough to just be not racist or not sexist.
Yeah.
We have to be actively anti-racist, anti-sexist, and fighting against all forms of discrimination, both on and offline.
100%. It's about looking at our own biases, calling out prejudice when we see it, and working towards a world where everyone feels safe and respected.
It sounds daunting, but it's also kind of empowering, knowing that we all have a part to play in making things better.
It can feel daunting, but it's also a powerful reminder that we're not powerless in this situation. We have agency. Every time we challenge a hateful comment, every time we amplify a woman journalist's voice, every time we educate ourselves and others about these issues, we're contributing to a solution.
We've been talking about the importance of education. Where do you think we should even start? I mean, the internet is like this vast, ever-changing landscape.
It's true, it can feel overwhelming. But one simple place to start is by improving our own media literacy skills. Being able to critically evaluate information, recognize the hallmarks of disinformation, understand how algorithms shape our online experiences, these are all essential skills for navigating the digital world.
It's like learning to read the language of the internet, right? Decoding the matrix.
Exactly. And then there's the equally important task of teaching these skills to others. We need to empower young people, especially, to be critical thinkers, to question what they see online, and to recognize the very real harm that online hate can inflict.
It's about creating a generation of digital citizens who are equipped to build a better internet, one that's more inclusive and equitable.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to the importance of collective action. We can't just focus on individual solutions. We need systemic change. We need governments to enact and enforce laws that protect journalists and hold abusers accountable. We need tech companies to prioritize user safety over profits. We need news organizations to create supportive environments where journalists feel safe and valued.
It's about shifting the culture, both online and offline, and that requires a sustained effort from all of us.
Absolutely. This isn't a problem with a quick fix. It requires ongoing dialogue, collaboration, and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
One thing that really struck me in the Best Practice Forum report was the emphasis on building resilience. It's not just about protecting journalists from harm. It's about equipping them with the tools and resources they need to cope with the inevitable stresses of their profession, especially in today's digital age.
It's a crucial point. Journalists are on the front lines of democracy, and they're facing unprecedented levels of online hate and harassment. We need to make sure they have the support systems in place to navigate these challenges without sacrificing their well-being. That includes providing access to mental health resources, creating peer support networks, and fostering a culture of open communication where journalists feel comfortable speaking out about their experiences.
Because if we lose sight of the human cost of this abuse, we've already lost the battle.
You're absolutely right. Behind every statistic, every hateful comment, there's a real person with real feelings and a real life that's being impacted. We need to remember that.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's important to acknowledge that this is heavy stuff. It's easy to feel overwhelmed or even hopeless when confronted with the scale of the problem.
It is, but it's also important to remember that we're not starting from scratch. There are already incredible organizations and individuals working tirelessly to combat online violence against women journalists. There are resources available, solutions being explored, and progress being made.
It's like that Margaret Mead quote, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has."
Beautifully put. We all have a role to play in this fight.
So what's one thing you hope our listener takes away from this conversation?
I hope they come away feeling empowered, not overwhelmed. Empowered to educate themselves, to speak out against injustice, to be an ally to women journalists, and to contribute to a safer, more equitable online world. Because change is possible, but it requires all of us to be engaged and committed to the fight.
So well said. And to our listener, we encourage you to check out the full reports from UNESCO, the International Center for Journalists, and the Best Practice Forum on Gender and Digital Rights for even more information and resources. You'll find links to those reports in the show notes. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Let's keep the conversation going online and offline, and work together to create a world where all journalists can do their vital work without fear of reprisal.